Introducing Nathan Kohlerman. Nathan has a remarkable life journey. He is a devoted father to three children, a US Army veteran, a speaker, author, multi-disciplinary therapist, resiliency coach, and emotional intelligence consultant. Nathan has cultivated an extensive background in transpersonal physiology, integrative somatic therapies, and leadership. His experience in emotional agility, resiliency, and conscious leadership has empowered individuals everywhere. On this episode, we dive into the transformation of his life from a young boy that found himself in gangs and broke his patterns by entering the US Army. Post-Army, Nathan dived deep into healing and empowering himself. And now he is teaching others to do the same. Well, that's enough from me, guys. Let's jump straight in. Welcome to the Honesty Policy Hour. I'm your host, Stephanie Marie, and it's time to put everything on the table on this beautiful journey of healing all areas of our lives, one deep conversation at a time. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to have you on.
Likewise. Yeah, where do you want to start?
Where can we start? You have a incredible journey and story, and I think that's a pretty good place to start. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your history and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I can go through the Cliff Notes version so that way we're not here all day. Grew up in a pretty chaotic way. Went through being bullied to not having a single friend until I was about 14. And after my parents split at about 14 years old, I got into gangs, drugs, etc., and so forth. And yeah, throughout that time, leading all the way from childhood to gang life, really, I had attempted suicide. I had gotten into numerous fights. I was a trained mixed martial artist since the age of 5. So I always had some foundation of resiliency, I would say. And all of that went away. It all changed once I got into gangs, once I started getting into drugs, started fighting a lot more. And it wasn't what I would call a lot of fair fights. It was a lot of just unexpressed brutality all coming out at one time. And there was a part of me that really enjoyed inflicting pain because, as we know now, hurt people. And I was really good at hurting people because I was really, really hurt on the inside. And it wasn't until I got shot at and back window got blown out after a robbery gone south that I kind of realized that my life needed to change in a lot of ways. Not just from the drug perspective, but just my entire life as a whole. The way I was showing up, the way I was acting out, the way I was treating my family, my given family, I should say, and the choices that I was making in life, whether it was choosing women or choosing drugs or choosing violence or choosing chaos and whatever other choices were available in the moment. The military was probably the best thing that ever happened to me after that moment, because if I was going to get shot at, I started thinking about this and I was like, I might as well get paid to get shot at. And if I really do enjoy violence, then hey, the military sounds like the perfect occupation for me. But on a more serious note, my mom and sister had sat me down, had an intervention with me, and it was really challenging for me to see the damage that I was doing to my family without actually doing physical damage to my family. So when the military showed up to my school the next week after that intervention, took that as a sign. And that's when that journey had, that ship had taken off from the port. So 2010, joined the military, and I served for 5.5 years Did about 21 months overseas, ranging from Korea to the Middle East. And I got demoted twice while I was in. One for fighting, go figure, and one for disrespecting a senior non-commissioned officer. Because apparently I had an issue with an authority, who would have thought? And some of that still lingers today. So I learned some hard lessons while I was in there. The military was not sunshine and rainbows. I was still a shithead when I went in. It took me about 2.5 years before I got promoted to sergeant, which is, again, incredibly fast in the Army. But around the same time of me getting promoted, I became a father. And that's really what straightened me out. So I'm a dad to a daughter who's 10 years old now, crazy. And I have 2 other children that happened from that moment to now.
Wow.
And being a dad and being in the military and deploying when she was 6 months old, definitely a challenging time for sure. And I was not a faithful husband back in the day. I definitely used my uniform for unconventional and non-integral purposes, we'll say. Mm-hmm. And I got away with that for a long time until I didn't. And it fundamentally crippled the relationship, in which I've had to do a lot of work on over the last 10 years in my relationship to women. And I'm just planting seeds as we go along this story, of course, because I think it'll contribute to what we're actually going to talk to later. And, I deployed, came back, marriage wasn't working, got a divorce, found my son's mom right afterwards in a rebound. And we had an illegal relationship because she was an officer. I was a non-commissioned officer. That was fun until it wasn't fun. And I was eventually medically discharged in 2016. So I got out. I'm on paper 100% disabled by the VA. I will not say much more in regards to disability and that sort of thing, because there are different ways to navigate disability, which, again, we might get to it as well. And since then, for the last 6 going on 7 years, I've been adamantly committed to my personal, professional, and leadership growth and development. Done a lot of healing, invested in a lot of training, a lot of education, a lot of programs. Went through a very serious physical injury, which led me to the work that I'm doing now, which is more in the psyche and the mind-body connection and how we are influenced on an internal level and the results that we create on an external level, and then how that correlates to our leadership, which is our identity in action, as I would like to say, and how we can create a better world for the children who are up and coming, to reinstill values and vigor into humanity without sacrificing who we are in the process, and redefining who we are by looking at how we define our darkness and how we utilize our darkness as our dharma, which is essentially our purpose in life, and how our artistry can be our darkness in living form, and how we can actually utilize that to attain or become the most authentic version of ourselves possible. And yeah, that's pretty much A to Z, a lot of details in between, but I think there are some necessary points that I planted in regards to, the call we had earlier, and wanting to tee that up really well for us.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I have so many questions. So many. I don't even know where to start. That was, wow, you really put me there in regards to talking about your mum and your sister approaching you, and then the school organising. So the school organising the military to come, that was completely coincidental. That was nothing to do with your mum or your sister or anything like that?
Yeah, the recruiters were just going around doing their school visits, and they were just standing on the front doorstep with flyers saying,
wow,
join today.
Wow. If that isn't a sign, I don't know what is. Holy shit. That's huge. That's huge.
Hmm.
Yeah. If that's so, were you prior to going to the military? Were you how old were you? Sorry, at that stage.
I was 17 when I signed my papers, and I
Wow.
left a
Okay.
month
And
after my
you.
18th birthday.
Wow. Okay. And were you addicted? So you said you went through you were addicted to drugs and you were in gangs as well at that stage.
Yeah. Yeah. I was
Wow.
literally high on heroin as I approached them at the table and said,
At
I want to change my
17.
life. Yeah.
That's massive. And that's what got you off heroin, going through the military.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I had done my best to detox a lot over the next several months. And of course, the military doesn't take kindly to people who were addicted to drugs before the military. So it has been something I've shared cautiously, but also at the same time, it's my story and
Yeah.
it's, what got me out of the darkest trenches of my life. And if I didn't join the military, I'd probably be dead or in prison, just like my mom said to me.
Whoa. That's massive. I don't even know where to start. That's just I just think about all I can think about now is obviously I'm a mum and I just think about having that conversation. It's
Mm,
it's yeah, it's either you lose them or you do something about it, and that is like holy shit, that's super heavy stuff. And the fact that you got out of it, that's most people don't at all. That's
yeah.
huge, huge.
Hmm.
Oh
I
my
mean, I look
goodness.
back and I mean, we see like the fentanyl crisis that's happening in the US right now,
Oh my
right?
goodness.
Like, that's 10 times worse than heroin was back in the day. And it's unfortunate to see a lot of young lives that are being lost from that,
Yeah.
because I mean, even just kind of not sure what it's like over there, but here we have so many systems that are designed to keep children stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Our school system is designed to keep them sitting down and subscribing to ideologies and teachings that
Mm-hmm.
inherently are fabricated to support the global narrative or the national narrative, or the means and the desires of the company, which is the country.
Australia's a downstream of the States, big time.
Hmm.
So we're probably not where you are, but we're not far behind. It's yeah, you just have to look at what they sell at the supermarkets and the food system and how they educate our children and just everything. It goes down to everything. What we're taught, food we eat, the water we drink, it's everything.
Right.
And, being a parent, I think you start to put on your different lenses and start, all right, shit needs to change and it's going to change with us. And we are such the generation to actually move that forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mentioned that just because, I mean, if there was a world where the youth were not indoctrinated into certain
Mm,
concepts, ideologies, and philosophies that are essentially created from a prerogative that is rooted in tyranny and through the agendas that are being played out. And I mean, this conversation is really important because of the state of the world right now
mhm,
and what we're seeing on the media and all this other crazy stuff. But there
mhm.
are bigger things at play. And I think that's the notion that I was wanting to communicate here, was that there is always a bigger agenda. And if not for these agendas, there would be a lot more clearer understanding of why these things happen. And for me personally, from getting involved in gangs and drugs and all these things, that was the societal norm. That is what you do when you're suffering. Because, I mean, especially as a man or a boy growing up at that time, everything was rooted in how strong can I be for my
Mm.
family? How successful can I be in terms of a future career? And a lot of those unnecessary pressures come from the larger agenda. So understanding that I think is really important, not to so much dismiss the smoke, which was just my lived experience, but the fire underneath it and the things that
Mm.
perpetuated and even maybe reinforced the pressure, which I identified as pain, to really see through and see beyond just the aspect of my own suffering, right? Because there's so many layers to this. It's not as simple as we'd like to think with drug
No.
addiction or gangs or the military or anything else, because that was simply the best that I had in the moment. And
Mm.
because of those experiences, it's shaped who I am today and why I can now see through the veils that tend to cover other people's eyes.
Mm.
But nope, not me.
Well, it's just it's so interesting. Like our traumas, like when we're going through them, they're just completely fucked. Like it's the worst thing that's ever happened to us. But on the other side of the trauma is where we receive the gifts and where we're able to teach people. And the fact that you're doing this right now, you're able to help men and boys and guide them through issues. Like anger is always masked by sadness. 9 out of 10 times, always, where it's, loneliness or isolation or, not having any friends or whatever it is when you're growing up, it turns into anger. And you see it so many as much, especially in like older men that haven't really done anything, haven't really sorted that, haven't had that any connection with themselves. Like I'm talking like 60, 70-year-old men where they're just, you can see them, they're just about to explode any second. And it's just this untouched trauma and they're just, walking on eggshells and
Mm.
it's their own eggshells really. And it's, picking apart those pieces and learning who you are and finding it's hard work, especially for a man. It's hard work, Being a woman, it's, we're so in touch with our emotions and we're so, we love to talk to other women and that's just what we are, it's built in us, primitively looking at us the way we were, we used to hunt and gather, we used to gather and go picking and communicating. And that was our way of existing as a woman. Where men, it was just, let's go hunt and kill and let's just show how strong we are, and there was no communication. Also, men had to be quiet when they were hunting. They had to be quiet to get the food. So there was no such thing as communication.
Mm.
So now we're learning that it can do damage. It can do really great damage by not expressing your emotions and tapping into that inner child. And it's fucking hard, man. It's so hard. I see it in so many men. I have so many beautiful men in my life, and from friends and one husband. um, it's they all go through the same thing. They all go through the
Mm.
same issues, and they all look different details, but it's always my purpose. How am I going to provide? How am I going to be a good father? How am I going to be a responsible father? How am I going to all these things? And then when one of them is lacking, this is where their self-worth becomes really, really hit, knocked, whatever you want to call it. It's hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the anger for sure I recognize.
Mm.
And it's interesting really, right? Because there's always something underneath anger, as I like
Mm.
to say a lot. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there is sometimes sadness and there's even
Mm.
sometimes happiness, right? A lot of people who might resonate with me on this one, because this is more so my experience, it's that if I allow myself to be happy for too often, then that becomes very uncomfortable. So then I find things to be angry about to mask the
Wow.
happiness that I'm not allowing myself to feel.
Oof.
And the nature of humans are so nuanced. It's hard to just blanket, one thing, right? To say that, oh, anger is sadness that's repressed, or it's, grief that isn't being addressed, right? We can identify a lot of different ways, but for men specifically, I think it's the identification with anger, it's the demonization of it, and it's the domestication of it,
Mm.
because it's what we were just talking about, like the domestication of society, the indoctrination of children, the narratives, the agendas that are being played out, the propaganda that's being fed in every moment. They're all just distractions and ways to domesticate who we are into the ideologies or philosophies that the agenda or the system thinks are greater for us than what we think is great for ourselves. And it could be seen as like conspiracy theorist type of approach. And it's also the reality that we live in. And anyone who's worked for the government, anybody who has some sort of security clearance, who has access to different information or different life experiences beyond just the ordinary world and what most people see, then they can see that this game of domestication is the root of all evil. And
Big
it's
time.
only when we feel domesticated or when we feel as though we have to fit inside of the cage that society deems as acceptable that anger becomes something that is toxic. When anger at its core is a standard human experience. And even as some of the ancients teach, right, there's anger, which is the element of fire, but we don't demonize fire until it's gone out and burned something down or if it's hurt someone.
Mm-hmm.
And it only gets out of control when we don't actually honor what the fuck it's actually doing. Right? Like anger, just like fire, it is equally a creative force as it is a destructive one. Without fire, without anger, we wouldn't have aggression. If we didn't have aggression, then nothing would be ever created. Nothing good would ever be created without
Love
aggression.
it.
We can
Love
create
it.
it from love and faith and all these things, but without aggression, then those things would have been built very slowly. And there wouldn't be this sense of urgency and impact, I believe, because that is also where we'd also lose a really critical part of our humanity in the process.
It's such an interesting one, isn't it? Anger. Like I feel, coming from a woman's perspective, anger can be seen as such a threat and it can be seen as such something that we fear. And, when we see anger, we just want to, put water on that fire and get rid of it because it's threatening to us. We don't feel safe when we're around anger. But aggression is something different. It's something that, we can see as, it's exciting. It's very different when you sort of say the two words differently. They completely can have two different meanings sometimes. For me, just hearing what you just said from aggression to anger, it was different things. It was creation and fear, and those two together are not too dissimilar either. So it's it was a really beautiful way, powerful way to put that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all contrast. I mean, something I teach and say often is that anger unprocessed becomes rage and aggression unprocessed becomes violent. And maybe misdirected in certain ways. It doesn't always have to be unprocessed, but misdirected without intention, it's going to actually follow the path of familiarity, which is what we see in the media and everything else. Like, why are we being shown all this stuff about war and violence? And what we're really seeing is the effect of what global and cultural systemic oppression looks like when left unchecked. That's what it's reflecting back to us. And it's not so much the smoke, which is what we see on the TV or what we hear from the news. It's the fire that's been burning underneath it for a really long time, to where now the smoke has filled the air and it's all we can really see.
It's just constant fear. It's just, it never stops. It's COVID. Then it's, financial hardships. And then it's everything's just gone up. Everything's just so expensive here at the moment. Constant hit of fear. And it was like, yeah, it's just next level. And we're just at that constant state of fear. Because when you're in that constant state of fear, you're not able to be clear, but to be the best version of yourself, because everything is just pushed down and just put you back into your box. And I think COVID gave everybody such a beautiful lens to see the world, because we saw how corrupt everything became, and it gave us some power. And I think that's why we went back to the voting system with the Indigenous. Most people voted no, because why is it up to us to vote for them? You know what I mean? Like, I'm going off topic here, but going back to it, we saw clearly, and it was a really beautiful platform because it gave us a new lens. And I feel like we're getting better at it, but the constant set of fear, it's definitely doing damage. And as a woman as well, it's scary to see. Like, if we're getting threatened as a society,
it's not a fun thing to feel all the time, and pushing it away when it's in your face constantly, it's hard work.
Yeah. I mean, fear is always an invitation to courage, right? It's always, I can see the fear, I can recognize the fear, I can feel the fear, I can sense the fear, I can identify the fear, but I am not identifying with fear. It's completely different. When we identify with the fear, and I just saw a video from Gabor Mate that was saying this, is that we are basically saying that we are the same of, is identify at its root origin in Latin. So when we can realize that fear is not what we are, it's what we experience, which is the greater invitation into a courageous act or a courageous state, then it no longer has power or control over our internal world. Right. So it's always reflecting back to us the invitation, the opportunity, like we were talking about trauma. We can see all the smoke that trauma creates, but really when we enter the dragon's cave, the dragon being the trauma we experience or whatever the case may be, and even in reference to story and Joseph Campbell's work, we know that it's guarding a treasure chest, and we don't necessarily know what that treasure is, but we face that dragon, we retrieve the treasure, and then we take the journey back home, not only to ourselves, but to those who we serve and those who we sit with and serve by our presence. And that is the gift, right? So even with everything happening right now and global agendas and all these different narratives and things that are playing out, there is always the opportunity. And that's kind of what I was like mentioning, is if we can see through the noise, then we can really feel the truth that lives within it. And if we can even just have the context of what's happening, which is what I would see is the typical Hegelian dialectic, we can start seeing that these orchestrated and fabricated events, these fabricated things that we see, the propaganda, the news, the media, which is an interesting turn this conversation has taken, we can
big time.
we can see the typical, what I would consider to be the psychological operation of everything. And we also do this to ourselves, so it might be valid when navigating trauma, right? We see there's a problem, there's a reaction, then there's a solution. And the first step in this dialectic is to understand and then sometimes even create and fabricate the problem. And then the second step is the antithesis, which is to generate the reaction or an opposition, right? To create the duality, and that is rooted in opposition, separation, and scarcity. And that is what facilitates the fear, the panic, hysteria. But we need to realize that after that, and this is what I was talking about, the invitation into courage is the act of synthesis. And that is where we can create our own solution, our own offering. And that is addressing the root, right? And a lot of the dynamics and control is that it's displayed on the news. We feel the separation. And then the very same thing that created the problem offers the solution that is still rooted in its tyrannical nature. So when we can pierce through the veil and start seeing the game that is being played, we can understand what our role is, how to support it, how to reject it, and then how to shift it into a state of sovereignty. Right? And this is the same approach that we go through when we come face to face with our life challenges, with our traumas, with our struggles. And this is how our mess becomes our message, is that we can recognize that things have to fucking burn. We have to hit rock bottom in order to realize that rock bottom even exists. And then to understand if rock bottom exists, then that must mean there's a way out or a way through, or a way within that leads to the through.
Rock bottom is a beautiful place sometimes when you look at it a different perspective. It can be a place of so much growth, depending on how long you'd like to be there for. You know what I mean? If it's me personally, I want to get out of there as quickly as possible. And it's look, I think it's a beautiful place to breathe through and just to acknowledge, all right, what am I doing here? Understanding it a little bit before we're moving forward. However, it's some beautiful things can come after rock bottom, and it's a powerful place to be. 100%. But going back to quickly what you said before about seeing through the fear, and I think a beautiful thing that has happened in the last couple of years after post-COVID times is not beautiful the fact that there's a little bit of a division, but you know who your people are very quickly now. You're very drawn to very much drawn to those who are on the same page, because we're so much more vocal about our opinions and about who we are and what we want of the world and what we want the world to look at for our future generation. And I think that's been a really beautiful part of it. So, I think some friendships can, 5, 6 years, you're just like, oh, it's not working. We're just different, whatever it is. But now it's just like, we know, we're very clear of who our people are. And I think that's become a beautiful part of what's been happening and of late in the media and in the government, especially.
Yeah, it's one giant cosmic lesson of discernment. Right? If people didn't know how to discern 4 years ago, they sure shit know how to discern now. Or at least I would hope to think that they know now that, our best interest is already inside of us. And it's just the recognition of that, right? It doesn't have to be the narrative that continues to be played out. There is like a glimpse of empowerment there, right? Like even pitch black has contrast. We just have to be able to recognize and acknowledge that it does in order to see it.
Pitch black has contrast. I love that. Love it. It sure does. When you look closely enough, it sure does. I just want to fast forward a little bit into your life at the moment and what you're actually coaching and projecting as well for men. So with these, I think a big thing that drew me to you personally was a lot of the workshops that you were running. There's this video in particular that you posted on Instagram where this man was sitting there and you had his hand on his back and he was just wallowing and his inner child and saying that what he wanted as a boy. And that just hit me so hard, that video. I think I watched it 100 times. It was just so powerful. I think seeing healing like that happen, it's powerful stuff. Is that something that you do on a regular basis? Is this part of your work?
Yeah. So the fundamental core of my work is healing. And the video that you spoke to is a lot of the work that I do with Sacred Sons. I've been working with them for about 3.5 years now, specifically in the men's space. And of course, I've worked with women and done so many different things in my profession, and at the core of my work, I would say it is healing work. And whether I'm working with emotional intelligence or, resiliency work with corporations, now I'm looking into local, state, federal government and bringing like awareness and consciousness and embodiment work into the mainstream narrative. I'm just learning how to position it better. We can realize that like healing isn't all about making the pain go away, right? Like that's what medication does, right? That's what medicine is, right? Medicine alleviates the pain so that way we're able to focus on the other aspects of life and not to allow our injuries or our wounds to get in the way of that. But healing in itself, and this is a lot of, again, what Gabor Mate talks about, it's not about making the pain go away. It's about being able to feel more, being able to tolerate more, being able to have the capacity to hold more and therefore create more. And really when that video, to go inside and look at these more neglected and maybe even abandoned parts of ourself, this is what I would consider to be dark alchemy, right? Darkness alchemy. It's all the things that we've suppressed, our unconscious biases, our conditioning that we chose, but we didn't necessarily know we were choosing it in the moment. These different elements of life that have been kind of shoved down our throat and we don't know how to digest it. It gets stored in the unconscious. It gets stored in what I would consider to be our darkness. And darkness is not the association to evil, and it's not biblical by any means. It's just the aspect of what Carl Jung talks about. It's bringing something that we weren't aware of, or something that we've been deeply repressing, pushing away, pushing down, stuffing down, all for the sake of strength or whatever else we've gaslit ourselves into believing, and coming to a place where we can feel and we can heal and we can take what we're feeling and utilize it for something greater, right? If we don't heal and if we don't commit to healing and we continue to medicate ourselves, then all we're doing is playing the game of numbing, right? We're not playing the game of healing. So yes, inherently medicine work, whether it's psychedelic or pharmaceutical or, holistic, whatever somebody's path, requires and desires and demands, we can see that healing is just the pathway through whatever it is that we're experiencing. It's a natural course of life. It's a natural rhythm of our biology. We're healing in every moment. We heal when we go to the gym and our muscles are repairing themselves so we can be stronger and faster, more durable for the world, to be more adaptable, to be more flexible, to have awareness of what we're thinking, what we're feeling, and what we're really doing with it, instead of just following the path that we've been essentially brainwashed to believe was the quote unquote right way for a really long
Right
time.
way.
Right. So like in that work specifically, it's like be with the inner child and recognize that we don't have to act out as that child has for a really long time, because now that we have awareness, we have choice. And that's really what it is. It's creating more agency in our life to where we have the ability to choose. We can decide what to do with it, or we can continue to victimize ourselves time and time again and then reinforce the narrative that essentially just perpetuates our suffering, right? Or we can do something about it and we can create change in the world.
Having those tools in our tool belt of, you said post coming back from the military, you spent a lot of money and time into healing modalities and trying to heal a lot of the traumas that you experienced and move forward, or rather than heal, make space for more feelings, as you said, which is super powerful as well. And it's, we going back there, it's with healing, it's so interesting how we're just so programmed to want to rid of pain instantly. Like we said, we got a headache, we take paracetamol, we do, we're not able to feel that. And it's such an interesting place to be, because when you actually sit in it, it's uncomfortable as whole hell, but it can be super it's not being so reactive and just sitting in it for a little bit. It can be such medicine in itself, sitting in that pain. And pain, just as much as anger, is just another human experience, and it's a powerful place. And not knowing where to direct that and how to use that, and going back to the tools we were saying, like there's so many things that we can do today that we're learning and that you're probably teaching, and it's just it's hard work, but they're there to support you, and they're not to rid of it. It's just to help you process it, how to breathe through it, like breath work, meditation, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a form of medicine, physical taking medicine. It could be so many different techniques. What was one technique that really helped you process a lot of your pain?
Man, I can probably spit off about 24 different things here. But what I will speak to is just the somatic piece, right? So my background primarily being in integrative somatic therapy and understanding the correlation between our felt sense of reality to our actual reality is very much a thing, right? So anything that facilitates breath, sound, and movement, right? So like stress release, trauma release, breath work stuff. There's that. There's a technique called aspecting that I teach my clients, that I teach inside of the Leadership Academy I co-founded. And this is where we actually have the dialogue. This is where we can utilize our breath. We can utilize different sounds to, the emotion that might be surfacing underneath. And we can create that dialogue, whether that's with a part of ourself or whether it's with someone in our life that requires some form of reconciliation that we weren't able to have in the moment. I had this conversation with my mother after she passed away, to have that conversation that I was never able to have with her. And because of that, and these different tools, they're all self-dialogue tools, is what I consider them to be. They're dialogue tools. And dialogue doesn't always have to happen with words, right? Dialogue happens through different forms of expression. Expression is the medicine. And if we're able to use breath work to facilitate an expression, then that has been extremely fundamental for me. A sound, and even just doing emotional release work and emotional transfiguration or processing work, I would say. Moving the sound and giving it a voice, giving it some form of expression beyond the story can be deeply healing as well. To know that we don't always need to make sense of our situation, but there is always a situation within our sense. And if there's a situation happening, then it needs to be processed. Because if we don't process, then it just gets pushed to the side and pushed to the side and pushed to the side. And then it becomes deeply repressed. And then we start to form who we are and how we show up from that, when expression is the medicine. Expression is the medicine. It will actually unlock who we really are and the message we have, not just from our mess, but for the people who we deeply care about in our life. And this is the glue to our social connection, right? And that's a big step in healing. It's, yes, use the tools, but then integrate them and come back into social connection. When we start looking at polyvagal theory and polyvagal model and how trauma moves through the body and how it moves through the nervous system, social connection is at the top of the pyramid. So if we're not actively taking our tools to express them fully and bring them into our social connectivity, we're missing out on a huge component of it, right? Co-regulation is the best integration, right? So it's like a combination of these things: breath, sound, movement, and kind of everything I had mentioned, whether it's an internal expression, an external expression, an internal dialogue, or an external dialogue. It requires and simultaneously demands us to lean deeper into those things, because stories alone will not solve our problems. Stories can breed success, but they can also equally breed suffering if not used with intention. And that's why our words become spells, and spell is our spelling, and spelling is what we do to write stories.
Well said, well said. I just wanted to go back a little bit just to describe to our listeners a little bit of what you mentioned with the polyvagal. So we're going back to the vagus nerve. Is that what we're talking about?
Essentially, yeah. So essentially, like the vagus nerve, right? And I'll simplify this more so, right? Yep. It's the connection from our brain down to the gut, right? Essentially down into that area. And in the gut, and I have a more of a transpersonal perspective here, which is linked to our personal power, right? Solar plexus, third chakra type of stuff. And we understand that our personal power does have a connection to our brain, right? We hear the gut-brain connection a lot. So the foods that we eat, the acidity of our gut, the water that we drink, the balance of our body in the form of water, all of these have an integral part in our healing process. And the vagus nerve is basically something that we can tap into voluntarily and involuntarily through different systems, through different applications that we've been talking about, whether it's a modality or whether it's through our nutrition or anything else. And we can start to reshape how our body interprets information, right? So when we notice we're dysregulated, when we notice that we have a shortness of breath, when we notice that our palms are sweating, when we notice that we start having these shortness and tightening of muscles in our chest area, we can utilize different techniques that stimulate the vagus nerve to bring a more soothing aspect to our mind. And it kind of takes us out of that limbic state, which is more of the survival state, and into more of a down-regulated or more self-regulated state where we can make more conscious decisions and choices. And in layman's terms, that's fundamentally what it does. But in polyvagal model, that's the vagus nerve. But in the polyvagal theory and model, which I would highly recommend anybody looks this up, is that we start seeing these different levels of connection to the nervous system and how trauma moves through the body, or how it moves through the nervous system, knowing that our nervous system is just the electrical circuitry that designates and propagates information from our internal reality to our external reality, simply put. So when we start seeing this, we can start seeing at the bottom of the diagram, if we had a picture, it'd be great. We can start seeing like this tonic immobilization, right? Where this is where we would say that we're stuck. We have this stuckness. We have this energy that is not moving. We have residue. We have things that are maybe dormant. This is the unconscious I talk about. The energy that is immobilized, something that is not moving. And to move it upwards towards social connection, we have to go into this middle area. And in this middle area, simply put, it's the fight or flight area. So we actually have to intentionally dysregulate ourselves. We have to intentionally bring ourselves into a state of discomfort to bring up the energy or the emotion or the feeling or whatever it is you subscribe to. We have to bring it up to be witnessed. We have to bring it up to be expressed. We have to bring it up to be processed. Because if it's not processed, it will therefore go back down. And it takes time to move through this. It's not just one event, you're one and done. It's the continuous progressive movement towards social connection, right? And this can be applied. It's not like a straight line. It's a spiral, right? Yeah. So we can start seeing the trajectory of things where something's immobilized, something is maybe stagnant. We start to move it. We start to face discomfort. Maybe we enter that relationship that we've been avoiding for a really long time. Maybe we start to show up in public places where we normally might feel anxious. And instead of reacting to that anxiousness or reacting to the toxicity of relationships that we might be used to or accustomed to, we decide to move towards social connection. And this is where we actually utilize our tools to process the thing. And once processed on a self-regulation level, we can move into a co-regulation level, and that's social connection. So what I'm really talking about here is the sequence of transmission, right? Or maybe the pathway of understanding the nervous system on a theoretical, yet also proven many times in many different ways on a scientific level, how we can actually graduate ourselves instead of stay stuck in our suffering at the bottom to move into a social connection and full expression at the top.
So moving forward and moving to the top, to social connection, is that just through acknowledgement and action, or is that through other modalities as well that can help push that up?
Yeah. So when I was saying that it moves through that middle area, right? That like fight or flight, that place where we intentionally and with intention face the discomfort. And that's where we maybe interject whatever tools we might be using to process, right? So awareness without action is just pain. So when we bring awareness and action together, that's what I would consider to be in that middle area where we can bring it up, process it, get the insight, get the gold, and then utilize that gold for continuous integration and integrating that not just from I'm going to do better next time, but very specifically understanding what is the message and then how do I apply this to my ordinary life where it actually makes sense and feels good for me, knowing that it's moving towards growth and liberation. And the way that I would simplify all of this, the lower you are is when you're in comfort and validation. And as you move up, you move towards growth and liberation, right? Yeah. Stagnancy is at the bottom, expression is at top. And if we learn how to go from one extreme to the other, the extravagance is located throughout the entire cycle, right?
It's such a powerful tool. Like even just you describing that, it's just you feel it through your cells, and it's that processing and action. Like when you take action to something that you've just been avoiding or in comfort. It just feels fucking great. It feels amazing. And, you know, that sense of doing, it's just, you know, that's who we are and what we're supposed to be doing. It's powerful stuff. And that was called, what was it called again? Sorry.
The polyvagal theory. Yeah, or the polyvagal model.
Polyvagal theory. Okay.
You know, and the way it looks, if you had a diagram at the bottom, we'd have like tonic immobility, also known as like dorsal vagal shutdown. And that's where we feel like numb, depressed, dissociated, stuck, or fatigued. And this is where it activates to escape the pain, right? Essentially. And as we move upwards and we move into that more sympathetic state, which is what I said, the fight or flight, this is where we have like our perceived danger. It increases our adrenaline. We have hyper awareness. And like I said, painful hyper awareness is like awareness without action. And this is where we feel like the anxiety, the jittery, the rage, the irritability. But once we are able to process those things, because we're actually feeling something, because we're going from numb to feeling something. And then from there, we're actually moving towards connecting to others. And we're actually activating the ventral vagal, which is that top piece, the social engagement. And the ventral vagal is what allows us to connect to other people, and it's activated while learning. And this is where we locate our joy, our love, our peace, our safety, and everything else. And again, it kind of moves upward, right? It goes from comfort and validation to growth and liberation. And through this model, we're able to determine where we're at, right? It's a reference point.
That's something that is just an acknowledgement that we can see that we're doing, where it flows. And like you said, it's not linear.
Right.
Growth is never linear. And so we can, once we're down at the top, something can shoot us back down to the bottom again quite quickly.
Right. And that's where like the vagus nerve comes in. And there's tons of exercises on the vagus nerve. The most powerful tool for the vagus nerve is like the voo, right? It's a voo sound, and it's just an inhale, voo, inhale, voo. Do that like 4 to 6 times, and it'll help slow things down, right? Because that's what the vagus nerve is, right? It's responsible for taking information, right? That gut-brain connection, interpreting danger, and it's able to digest information, and then it's responsible for slowing things down. So that way, when we start feeling our increased heart rate, we start seeing, you know, the sweaty palms, those are signs of like an increase in blood pressure, essentially. And we can actually utilize these very simple tools through breath and sound and movement. And this is where like shaking the body and things like that come into play. We're actually able to command that more, because a lot of these different things that are happening are involuntary responses to danger or perceived danger. And when we learn how to command our nervous system, command our mind, command our body, command our vagus nerve specifically, we're able to slow things down, where it creates that opening, that agency to make more conscious choices and decisions. And then we start to be able to see where it is we are on that spectrum of understanding, and then actually apply or implement whatever tool we deem to be necessary with a very intentional action plan, also known as integration.
Yeah, that's a very powerful way of looking at it. And that's something that can take years or your entire life to kind of look at. It's not something that is a quick fix. And I think, modalities within that would be something that, but again, we're not talking about alleviating pain instantly. We're talking about progression and just getting better as a human being. It's not an easy task. Definitely not.
Not always, but it takes time.
Not always. Sometimes. Yeah. It does. And talking about growth, congratulations on the new book. That's huge. Massive.
Thank you.
Is this your first book?
It is my first book. It's been
so
a 5-year vision coming to life.
So you're technically an author now.
Yes, I am. And it feels good.
Wow.
Feels good. Some of my work has been inaccessible for other people, whether that's due to space, time, energy, money, whatever. And to have this book, which is essentially a culmination of my life experience and my training and education and my own personal perspective, that is very much evidence-based and transpersonal in nature, meaning that it has a more deeper philosophical maybe approach to it, because there is like evidence to suggest some things I talk about, but really it's after doing a lot of this work for myself and leading hundreds of people through my work. And I wanted to address a lot of the things that I've seen that are more nuanced in today's world, going into like inception, like the metaphysics of creation and death, to rage and victimhood, going into mystery work, darkness alchemy work, how to navigate your darkness versus eradicate it, how to fundamentally source safety, how to express, how to find truth and freedom and love through these different aspects of self, and how to really navigate the micro suicides that we commit on an everyday basis without even knowing it, that eventually lead to our ideation and contemplation of it, has been really profound to put that in when I started really looking at things and how, loneliness and isolation, how self-sacrifice, abandonment, self-neglect, hopelessness, powerlessness, how all these things play their roles, but to find a more, I would say, inspiring and also subjective rather than objective way to look at things, to where the book doesn't deliver answers, it delivers perspectives. And through these different perspectives, it gives people different reference points to identify where they are and how they want to see the world and how they can navigate that for themselves in their darker times.
Perfect message. It's a beautiful message. I think we don't need answers. Our answers are always within, but giving a perspective, a different perspective, it gives us the gift of perspective, and able to work out how what you've done and your perspective has influenced, and how we can actually influence it in our lives. It's a perfect way to, I think we're always seeking answers. However, having that different shift of insight is a gift in itself. So that's a beautiful gift to give to the world. And who are you directing this book at? Who do you think that this book can help?
Yeah, so I think I had mentioned this on the video that you had said you saw, but it's really for someone who's maybe stuck, right? Somebody who feels like they're in that void space of life. Maybe there's a lack of clarity or certainty in direction. Maybe there's some confusion because of all the information in the world, because of all the conflict that's being seen, all the distractions that are being tossed out unsolicitedly left and right that we see, whether it's through social media or through the news or whatever. But really the main person, who I always saw getting this book was the person who is holding a gun in one hand and my book in the other. And instead of choosing the gun, they choose to read the book. And it has everything that they might need to hear in that moment. So that way they can find not just hope, but they can trust and have faith and really ultimately command their destiny, than feel like they're a victim or a martyr to their circumstances, when it doesn't have to be.
So every man is through the book.
Every human, I'm hoping.
Every human, yeah.
I mean, we all go through dark times, right? And I'm out of the many conversations I've had, like almost every single person in my life who I've ever met has either ideated or contemplated suicide at one point in time. Myself on a number of occasions. And now I see the ideation and contemplation process as the invitation to really go in what I would call commit conscious ego suicide, and finding what needs to really be shed or what needs to die and be honored in a way that doesn't lead to an actual physical death. It's a metaphorical, it's a symbol of transformation versus a life sentence.
That's powerful. It's such a relevant thing to say. I think, you know, when death, even physical death, when physical death happens, it's, you know, going back to Marcus Aurelius, Memento Mori, when he contemplated death and flipped the coin. And it's a beautiful thing because contemplating death allows us to really, really, really see where we are in the world and how, what needs to change. And, you know, death, it's physical, but it's also metaphorical because it's a change in time, and it's a change in, all right, this no longer serves me anymore. Let's keep powering forward. Let's keep moving forward. I acknowledge that, and it served me at a different time, but this is not what serves me anymore. And it's a powerful, powerful message. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing to do and put out in the world. So congratulations again. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited for it. Very excited.
And before we wrap this up, where can people find you, Nathan, and purchase your book and find all about you? They
can find out all the things. All my socials are pretty much the same, just Nathan Kohlerman, at Nathan Kohlerman. I'll have my podcast up here pretty soon for Spiritual Psychopath. The book will be called Between Two Worlds, and we have a projected publishing and launch date of January, end of January, we'll say, for now. And that'll be on Amazon. I'll do an Audible shortly after that. And yeah, they can check out my work at newintention.com. I'll be creating nathankohlerman.com by the end of the year. So that'll be up and running. And yeah, just hit me up on social. Come say hi. I'm nice for the most part. And I would love to connect with you.
Amazing stuff. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story and your work and everything. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate you and your work as well.
Worries. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for who's listening, wherever you're listening from. Have a beautiful day. Peace. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you received a few good takeaways from the episode. If anyone came to mind while listening, please share it across. Your support will certainly help promote the podcast. To follow everything that I'm doing at the moment, head to my Instagram page, Holistic Healing with Steph Marie. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you on the next episode for more conversations that are raw, honest, and vulnerable.